Hey, what's up guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun channel. I had a chance to sit down with my good friend Justen Faull of The Fourth Watch, and he's also a filmmaker, and he just released Hollow Earth Chronicles Episode 1, The Dark Chambers. And you guys definitely need to check this out. But even if you can't, in my discussion with Justen on this video here, we get into some of the topics that are covered and talk about not just the Hollow Earth, but how all this relates to everything going on right now, the bigger picture, the prophetic nature of everything, and help us grasp this dimensional reality that we're living in that I think the Bible actually tells us about, but most people have completely materialized everything and had forgotten that we live in a supernatural reality where the world above and the world below seems to have common themes. For example, time dilation. So we get into some of that in this discussion. Apart from the interview, I will occasionally jump in for references and some more information. But otherwise, here's my discussion with Justen Faull, talking about his documentary, Hollow Earth Chronicles, Episode 1, The Dark Chambers.
And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord, and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. Job 1:7.
The world consists of vast cultures with stories that constantly connect their gods with the inner earth. And not just their gods, but reptilian races of hybrid entities. We're talking superhumans, strange animal creatures, or what the Book of Giants refers to as monsters.
When you're dealing with the areas around the world where so much myth, legend, oral tradition, and belief, contemporary belief, there's always almost an embracing of the underworld.
The earth is actually dynamic. By that, what I mean is that, we all go to work every day, we get in our car, we are driving over a shell under which, according to the Bible, there is supernaturalism, there are entities, there are creatures, there are beings.
If you were going to hide something and keep something secret, there's two places to do it. One is in the deep, deep oceans. The second place is a labyrinth, a network of tunnels and areas which go deep underneath the earth.
There was truth to this idea that this race called the Vril-Ya had been existing under the earth since the days of the Great Flood in the antediluvian world. In fact, the belief of the Vril-Ya and of the power of Vril was actually so prominent among German occultists that it gave birth to a secret society, one of the most notorious secret society involving the Nazi regime, called the Vril Society.
The Nazi expedition to Shambhala originally started in Greenland with the Edda. The Edda were ancient Nordic writings describing a hollow earth. They went there to see if they could find further details or information. This was the top of their agenda. They had to find this opening. And the next thing you know, they had the Neuschwabenland expedition to the Queen Maud Land area of the Antarctic. It's what drove them. It was a religious belief that drove them to cordon this area off and claim it for their own.
When I read Admiral Byrd's description of things that he saw and how it felt going into this abyss type of opening, but it also was a long time ago, and we've learned a lot about quantum physics since then. We've learned a lot about how these types of things would work, and there are too many descriptions in there of things that he saw that line up with current quantum physics understanding.
The underworld of our people, very similar to the Cherokee stories, the Creek stories, the Maya Incan stories of underwater panther and these underworlds where there was completely different civilizations that lived under there.
We know in the Bible that the Watchers, the angels who kept not their first estate, according to Peter, are kept in chains in Tartarus until the judgment, kept in darkness until the judgment. Tartarus, in Greek mythology, is as far below Hades. It's not Hades, it's as far below Hades as the earth is below heaven. That's where the Watchers, according to Peter, have been confined.
And what we're finding out is that the fallen angels and demonic entities have been molding the views. They've been molding the cultures, and hyper-intentionally, they've been molding the religions of the world. They've been literally priming the world for the greatest deception of all time. And we are fast approaching that time right now, according to the Bible.
It goes back to my research. I'd always heard conspiracy theories about the Hollow Earth, and it sounded interesting to me. It was obviously kind of a cool topic, mostly coming out of the New Age movement. But when you start to see passages in Scripture that refer to inside the earth, and there's many references to inside the earth in the Bible, but the one that really caught my attention was in Job. Satan goes before the Lord, and it says that God asks him, where have you been and where did you come from? And it says, whence comest thou in the King James? And Satan says, I've been going to and fro, back and forth, up and down in the earth. And many people will overlook this passage. I know I did many times, but when you start to think about it, it's very telling that Satan is doing something inside the earth. And some of the newer translations, albeit some of them have good translations in certain parts of the Bible, but they've changed the word from in the earth to on the earth. And the problem we get with that is that the rest of the description that we read in Scripture, up and down, to and fro, back and forth, it's painting a picture. And you can't fulfill those directional movements if it's just on top, but rather inside. And so the King James, I think the New Jerusalem, and there's possibly one or two other translations that say in the earth. And that kind of sparked my interest to go further, because I now knew that there was a biblical precedent to a hollow earth or a subterranean realm. Of course, many people know about hell, Abraham's bosom, things like that. But I started to dig deeper, and I found many passages, which we break down in the film. We go through a handful of passages, break them down contextually, to get a better understanding that there are things going on inside the earth. So that really catapulted me into this area of research.
Do you actually think that it's like, because when people say hollow earth, they imagine, literally like a balloon or like a ball, right? Where it's just like all hollow on the inside. Is that what's going on? Or are we talking more caverns and like different, like a whole honeycomb network going on? What's happening?
I think there's, it's one of those situations where it can be everything and all inclusive. And again, there's going to be a certain amount of speculation when we get into this, because nobody, at least none of our colleagues, can really go down into the earth to explore it for ourselves. But many people have gone down. And so, yes, there are caverns. There are massive networks of tunnel systems, even underground cities, ancient underground cities, which many people have written about. Some of them mystical, some of them just normal cities that any human can approach. But the other side of that is we're dealing with supernatural, or what we would say dimensions. There are many cultures around the world, especially getting into the Native Americans and the South Americans, Mexican Indians, Mesoamericans, and they have many stories about going down into these cavernous systems. And then once they were there would be a ritual or a certain location that they could go to. There would be some type of a portal that would open up. And as strange as that may sound to some people, there's not always magic involved in opening up a portal. I mean, when you have ancient rites that take place up on the surface, leading a person down into the earth, some of these Native Americans, they would go through these protection rituals. Joseph Riverwind talks about they would go through protection rituals before they would go down into these caverns. Sometimes they would swim down through a waterway inside the earth. We've got bodies of water inside the earth. And then they would go through that cavernous system of water up into another location, and there would be a portal that they would swim through or crawl through, and then they would retrieve some type of an ancient object. Now, this object could be one of many different things, different types of artifacts, but then that object would be brought back to the surface world to prove that person's worth. That was kind of a ritual ceremony for somebody to become a man in order to be a warrior in their tribe. So you've got extra-dimensional qualities, extra-dimensional stories of Some people will see it, some people won't. It depends on the person. Have they been communicating with entities? Have they gone through rituals on the surface before going down into the earth? There's a lot of variables that play into this. But I want to say that all of those aspects are true, but you bring the bottomless pit into the equation, and I think that is a very controversial area because, you know, we have two major factions in research pertaining to the shape of the earth. You know, you have people that believe in a flat earth, and then you have people that believe in a globe earth. Now, regardless of where people land on the shape of the earth, what we know for a fact is that there is a subterranean realm. But the idea of a bottomless pit, it's always been my idea, you know, my belief system since I've entered into this research, that the bottomless pit would be the pole. You know, we're dealing with a pole that's going to, and again, flat earth, a lot of the flat earth people don't like the idea of a north and south pole because they say that that's not part of their model. But when you start to research it, you find out that God's word, regardless if you take the flat earth or the round earth side, there is a bottomless pit in the realm of earth. So I take the idea, you know, I lean more towards the idea that there are elements of elements of flat earth and round earth working together. I think you and I talked about this on an episode of Canary Cry, but I do believe there's a north and south pole. Absolutely. And I think that the pole would likely be the candidate for the bottomless pit.
So it's almost like a toroidal shaped kind of donut.
You know, it's hard to say because I've never been up into space.
That's what I always say about all these topics with, or at least the shape of the earth discussion. I always say I haven't been up high enough to tell you. Some people claim they have, but I think there's something that goes along with, you know, the abyss being something that the ancient Israelites saw as the seas, right? Kind of the ocean. But then that's not wrong either if we talk about maybe certain dimensional qualities. I had a story of, and there's no way for me to confirm this, but somebody that was in the military, or I had a friend whose son was in the military, and he said that, you know, usually he would get a call every week from his son just to kind of check in on, you know, how things are going. Well, he didn't get a call for a couple weeks. And, you know, a few weeks later, he got a call and said, I couldn't call because I was under Arizona. And he's in the Marines. Apparently he does like submarine work kind of stuff, you know, and they thought he was kind of joking, but he was like, no, I was under Arizona from the ocean. So you can get under Arizona from the ocean. I think there's a lot more going on, and the military knows a lot more. Did you find anything in your research that would suggest that there is some kind of cover up of this, of at least an underworld?
Yeah, absolutely. In the film, we interview a wide variety. I think we got a lot of the heavy hitters from the Christian research area. I mean, we've got L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino, Tom Horn, Joseph Riverwind, myself, Josh Peck, Derek Gilbert, Jim Wilhelmsen. L.A. Marzulli, he brings some stories about other military guys who had been over in the Middle East. Now, putting aside the whole Kandahar Giant thing, because these are two separate events, but there are stories of these teams of soldiers going down into cavernous systems. Now, they enter through a cave. So it's a cave on the surface, but they enter through it, and then they travel down. I mean, it's a clear path for them to go through. They're going down. Before they know it, they are down beneath the surface of the earth in these underground cities where giants are. And they tell stories of whole civilizations of modern day hybrids, giants living down under the earth. Then you get over to the United States, and there are many stories, especially off the coast of California, that I've heard, where there will be UFOs they'll be seen over the water. They'll come down. They'll literally go underwater and just disappear. Now, it's my opinion that they're going down through some type of a gateway. Now, could it be that they're going underwater, entering in, you know, maybe flying into an opening in the ground? You know, I don't know. But what I do know is that this kind of lines up with the Hebrew understanding of the story of Jonah, which Tom Horn breaks down in our film about Baravak, or the city of gates. And breaking down the story of Jonah, we find out that Jonah went down to a place called the city of gates. And obviously when we start to investigate the word gate, we find out that there are doorways, gates, portals, openings into another dimension or another realm. So, I think there's a major connection, and you've seen the film. In the film, we showed that there's connections with spirits in water and entrances through water into the hollow earth. And again, I use the term hollow earth because that's the popular term that we find in the mainstream. Some people like to call it the subterranean realm. Some people call it hollow earth, whatever you want to call it. But many connections with spirits, entities, the water, and hollow earth. So, I probably went a little longer on that question than you anticipated.
No, it's good because I think if you really look back, there are a lot of stories like that. I know just in my youth, I was given a few stories, just Japanese folklore. So the first story I was referencing is the Utsurobune, or the hollow ship. And it refers to an unknown object which allegedly washed ashore in 1803 in Hitachi province on the east coast of Japan. And according to the legend, an attractive young woman arrived on a local beach aboard the hollow ship. And this image of the hollow ship is very interesting, as it looks kind of like a UFO. There's another one where actually there's a man who decides to is invited to go down into the world under the oceans or whatever. This is called the Urashima Taro, and it's a Japanese fairy tale. In the story, a fisherman named Taro rescues a turtle, which in gratitude carries him to the dragon palace that lies beneath or beyond the sea. There he is entertained by the princess Otohime as a reward. He spends what he believes to be a few short days, but upon his return to his home village, he finds himself 300 years into the future. And when he opened a box that was given to him and was told never to open on the surface, he instantly turned into an old man. Basically, the box was holding his age, the actual time of his realm, which is very interesting and very similar to what modern physicists describe as the sort of time difference in experience that can occur when you go and travel far distances. And so, given in this folklore, this Japanese folklore, are weird time-shifting, preservation of time, youth, eternal youth type of overlap, but all coming from these entities with a civilization that lives underwater. So, yeah, absolutely, there's probably something going on down there that, James Cameron going down there, doing whatever, riding around in his little submarine thing. Like, you probably have plans to do something like that eventually.
Yeah, hopefully, if I can get the funding,
Yeah. So yeah, and I thought you did a really good job in the film to summarize all these different ideas, because there is a lot of evidence, and I think there's a lot of questions as to, what's really going on. And you're right, it's hard to really nail down, because it's like, what are we going to do? We can't like get up high enough to necessarily see anything. We can't necessarily go down far enough. Presumably without, running into these entities. Or at least, maybe not being able to come back. How much do you think, people gone missing, people perhaps even faking their death, dare I say, celebrities or whatnot? Do you think that people are retiring, quote unquote, into that world? I mean, is it possible that there's stuff going on down there? If there's giants walking around, then is it possible that the high level, dark technology that they've been developing also exists, and, people that, science fiction galore down there with, maybe they got Hitler on some kind of brain machine robot. I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out there. But how many people do you think are in the know about something like this?
Well, the government is definitely in the know. Headlines across the globe. You've got these military groups going underground, setting up underground cities, underground bunkers. We have more underground or deep underground military bases and establishments where they are doing all types of research, transhumanism, creating of chimera embryos. We've got stories of the Dulce base, or Dulce. They've got the level down there that people call the zoo. And then you've got a level where there are entities that are in charge. And again, this is stuff that's really hard to vet. But, was it William Cooper, I believe? William Cooper. Am I getting his name right? Is it William?
Yeah, Bill Cooper.
William
Cooper.
Who's no longer with us, but he told stories of firsthand accounts, and he was a government geologist, and he says he was down there in multiple levels underneath the earth in the deep underground military bases. He came face to face with entities. There's a lot of very strange a lot of strange spin-offs of his stories that we hear from different people who claim to have been down there or have family members who have been down there. But I think that there's a mixture. I know the government is doing a lot under the earth. The Nazis, this really takes us back to the Nazis when we start thinking about government involvement and what are the governments of the world doing inside the earth. The Nazis, they have a religious system set up, or they had, and that system was based on this esoteric belief that the Nazis were descendants from this race called the Aryans. And this was a supernatural race. It ties back to theosophy. You get into the Madame Blavatsky teachings, and the root races, you have this Aryan race that supposedly goes back to the days before the flood. And they were the underworld race. Like, they would come back and forth on the surface, under the surface. And the Nazis believed that they are a watered-down descendant of the Aryan race. And so it was their goal, first and foremost, to try to locate the opening to a hollow earth. There was a German magazine called Der Spiegel, and they came out, I forget what year it was, but they came out and they announced that we have found the opening to the hollow earth. And we also have to understand that most of Nazi Germany, at least by majority, was in support of the Nazi Party. Now, there was a lot of people that were not, they were not fans, they did not support Hitler, but by majority, they bought into this ideology that they were somehow supernaturally connected to this race called the Aryans, and they wanted to purify their bloodline, kind of like a dominionism theology of their day, where they could purify their bloodline and kind of set up their own kingdom to be reunited with the gods of old, the Aryan race. And so Hitler made it a major part of his checklist to get down into the hollow earth. We have multiple places where this took place. We know that they were welcomed by the Tibetan monks. They were able to go down into an area that they call Shambhala. This is the records that have been passed on say that the Nazis actually made it into the hollow earth in this area through the Himalaya mountains. And when they were able to go in there, they came into contact with this group called the White Brotherhood. Now, this isn't like the KKK. It sounds kind of like that, but we're dealing with nothing less than the Ascended Masters. And so the Nazis were given entrance and sanctuary in Tibet. They were taken down with the monks. They were shown the secret places to get in. They had connections with entities. Then they came back. That was just one of their expeditions that took them into the hollow earth. Another expedition is Antarctica. And if we have time, I want to get into that. But that ties in with the American government as well, because there was a lot of fighting going on. And still to this day, there's so much interest in Antarctica. And I think it's important to note that Antarctica is on the record as having more than one opening. Not just one. We now have records from British intelligence and U.S. intelligence that there's multiple openings in Antarctica into this subterranean realm. Now, if you research what the Nazis did before the Exodus, I call it the Exodus, before, during, and after the Second World War, Nazis were already going down to Antarctica and setting up a secret base known as Base 211. So, and this is in their records. You can read about this. They had mapped it out. They had charted out the area. And they had set up this Base 211, which some people claim doesn't exist. But it had to have existed if we study what the Nazis did in their timeline. There was something down there that they had set up. What happened was they had faked Hitler's death after the war. And Hitler, along with many others, there are different records, different accounts that claim up to 1 million or a little over 1 million. Some people believe it was 500,000. But we've got a massive amount of Nazis. They're thinkers, they're doers, they're shakers. Doctors, occult magicians, psychic mediums, scientists, everything. The elite of the Nazis that had the most brain power, they went on this massive exodus down to Antarctica. And they had been setting up shop down there. And so we find out later that this makes sense when we study Operation High Jump, because our government sent Admiral Byrd down into the Arctic. We had people from Britain and Australia going with us. And we went down there. They told the American public that it was going to be an exploration mission. And there's different things involved with that. But when we study the ships that were part of this, there was a massive undertaking that our government did. And they went down there. There was not one laboratory ship that was set up for scientific research. What we had icebreakers. We had warships. Literally, when they went down to Antarctica, they went down there prepared for war. And what we find out later is that this mission, this Operation High Jump, it ended much earlier than it was supposed to, because they met opposition down there. Some people speculate that the opposition was extraterrestrial in nature, because we do now have reports of British intelligence going to Antarctica and coming back reporting to have seen Yetis. Now, some people may laugh at this idea, but there are reports of, top, I mean, it blows my mind to even say this, but we're dealing with top security cleared British intelligence coming back and saying that they saw Yetis or abominable snowmen down there. Now, I don't have an answer for that. I can't tell you if it was some type of entity. I don't know if it was an entity. I don't know if it was a hybrid creation that was created down there, some type of a chimera. I don't know. But it blows my mind to consider this, because now people are saying that they met force with aliens down there. I believe, with all of my research, that we fought the Nazis down at Operation High Jump in Antarctica. We got our butts kicked. Some of the ships that they were removed from the logs. One of the ships we cover in the film is the USS Pine Island, and the Pine Island, interestingly, it got removed. It was literally lost, according to the records, for a certain span of time. Now, it shows back up later on ship logs, and they even had some ceremonies surrounding this ship when they retired it, but it disappeared off the logs for a certain amount of time. Now, it's my belief that they had to repair the ship, and they didn't want the American population or the public to know that there were laser beam technologies that were shot out of UFOs cutting through the ships. There's a lot of eyewitness accounts from American soldiers who went down there. They've come back. They've told the stories to their family. The stories have been passed down, and our government is hush-hush about it. They literally did not want to talk about what actually happened down there. They came up with a cover story, and that was that. They put out a propaganda documentary called The Secret Land, and that pretty much showed the view of Operation High Jump that they wanted people to believe.
Yeah.
But Admiral Byrd, he was the guy that led that expedition, and we have a lot of interesting allegations towards this man, Admiral Byrd. We also have Forstall, James Forstall. He was thrown off of out of his hospital. What was it, like the third story of his hospital?
Right.
I forget what the hospital was called. It was in Bethesda, Maryland. I'm trying to think of the name of the hospital. But he was in this hospital. He was thrown out. I think it was the third story. He's thrown out the window, and he dies. And this all happened after he came out publicly, and he started to tell people that he had the secrets of Antarctica that he wanted to share with the world. We couldn't keep it from the American people, but the government higher up said, you're not going to tell anybody, and they threw him out of the window. So there's a lot of conspiracies surrounding Antarctica, what took place in Operation High Jump, and we do a really good job in the film of breaking down what happened on a timeline and disproving some of the popular beliefs about it. But then we also go into the Admiral Byrd scenario. There's this diary that appeared, and it's kind of surfaced, and it's claiming to be Admiral Byrd's diary. And I'm sure you know this is a controversial topic because many people don't believe that it was his, right, but many people do. But we actually had a voice actor come into the studio, and we recorded a dramatized version of Admiral Byrd's diary, which we put in the film as well. And, Jim Wilhelmsen, he doesn't believe that the dating is correct. He believes that the information is correct, but the dating is not correct. He believes it was from Admiral Byrd's first North Pole expedition, and that it was kind of edited and put out around the time following Operation High Jump. But, Admiral Byrd's not the only person to say that he's come into contact with entities inside the pole. He's not the only person to say that he dealt with UFOs. He's not the only person to say that he's flying towards the North Pole, and then all of a sudden the Arctic icy conditions dissipate into like this lush, beautiful Jurassic Park looking forest. Right. And Admiral Byrd also, if it's his diary, which I believe it is, he also gets into this whole thing where mammoths show up on their flight. The same mammoths that we've been told have been extinct for however many years. So there's a lot of mystery about the poles, the North Pole and the South Pole. We have other accounts that we cover in the film of sailors who sailed into the North Pole, and they lived down there for so many years. And when they came back onto the surface, and by the way, they lived down there with giants. This is all part of Olaf Jansson's biography. And he was a Norwegian sailor. He and his son sailed down in there. We break this down in the film. But he explained that when they came back to the surface, that the time was different. So like the time passing under the earth, this kind of gets me thinking extra dimensional. Right. But he says the time that passed down there was different. So when they got up to the surface, it was like they had been down there for a different span of time than they were actually down there. And this kind of lines up with the Chuck Missler teaching that if two twins were to go to the closest star on a spaceship and come back, one twin goes, one stays. By the time one gets back from going to the closest star in space, they're not the same age anymore. Right. So there's a difference in how time is perceived and how time plays out inside the Earth and as we get up into space.
Or what they call space, yeah. It's really interesting. Just recently, you probably heard about this. National Geographic actually came out with an article that says, hole the size of Maine opens in Antarctica ice. And, okay, they're like, oh, we don't know what's going on, but giant hole appears in Antarctica. And then all the people going down there, the conspiracy world has been kind of looking at it for a while, but I wanted to kind of ask you, I don't know, this, you don't have to get political per se. I want your commentary on sort of the modern situation here, because I'm curious about what you think in terms of, I've talked about on my channel how there's a weird thing happening with the whole Trump presidency in that, the topic of UFOs and aliens and stuff has been shelved and not really talked about, which is understandable. There's like all this other crazy stuff going on. I get it. But at the same time, he's got a really interesting history, right? His uncle, met with, or was one of the first people to try to decode the Tesla papers once they were confiscated. And there's also this weird connection here, of maybe a coincidence. Our author Ingersoll Lockwood in 1890 or 1900, I guess it was the year it was published, wrote a book called Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey, where he goes, through, I think it's through Russia. He goes to the cavernous underground and, goes on his adventures and whatnot. I mean, it's really kind of a weird situation there. Do you think that there's a connection with all of this, in that like there's a group that probably runs everything out of there? It's kind of like an HQ for what we call New World Order, Illuminati. Do you think it all ties into that whole scenario?
No, are you asking about Antarctica specifically, or the Hollow Earth complex?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I guess the underworld itself, but then Antarctica being sort of that, maybe a post, in between these worlds or whatever, and they, I don't know, what do you think? What's the hierarchy here? Are they, the inter-Earth, beings trying to take over the surface again, or what's kind of the larger narrative at play?
Yeah, so Antarctica is very interesting in the fact that the governments of the world have a major interest in it right now. We're talking about like the big players in America. John Kerry's been down there, Obama, the Pope. I'm trying to think of the guy. I think his name's Bartholomew, the Russian or the Greek Orthodox Church. He's like the Pope for the other side. There's a lot of rumored allegations that all these people are regularly going down there. Why? There's something going on there. Now, the United States has had a military/political presence there. I believe it was since 1957. And we also, something that we need to note is that the Perry-Reese map, this is crazy, man, but the Perry-Reese map, it shows Antarctica without ice. So,
right.
And some people I've talked with some of my friends and fellow researchers, and there's a theory out there that I kind of lean towards, that it's possible that the ice in Antarctica was created with technology, that they've used some type of technology to ice it over to create this ice shelf to protect what they're doing in Antarctica. Kind of like the last frontier that no man can go to. I mean, you don't just go to Delta Airlines and say, I want to book a flight to Antarctica. You just don't go hang out there. It doesn't work like that. It's probably easier to go to Cuba than it is to go to Antarctica. But regardless of that, I think there's a center set up there. I think that there is, I don't want to call it an industrial complex, but there's something going on there where it's massive technology involved, I think. I believe there's research going on there that would probably not be legitimate to practice here in the States for multiple reasons. So it's hard to say, but I definitely believe that the cabal, if you just want to call it the cabal, the NWO, I think that some of the key players are dealing inside of the Earth in different places. And when we study some of the Nazi writings, we find out that there are tunnels inside the Earth that connect pole to pole. Literally, like they believed that you could travel all around literally from side to side, pole to pole inside the earth, that there were ancient tunnel systems that were created before, I don't want to say before mankind, but there's a lot of theories out there. I don't want to sound unbiblical in what I say, but this is based on what they teach. So,
like a pre-Adamic race kind of situation.
Yeah, basically the gods of old created these tunnels, and that's what we would call them, the gods of old, the fallen angels. They created these tunnels, they created this whole inner world inhabitants, and they only allow select members of the human race to come down there and operate. And so in doing my research, I would say that I land on the idea that yes, there's a massive conspiracy going on inside the earth. And I think it's also leading us up into the end times, where we see biblical prophecy being fulfilled. Right. The Septuagint translation in Isaiah talks about giants will come up to fulfill God's wrath. We've got some very interesting interpretations of different parts of scripture that seem to make sense once we grasp the idea of the hollow earth. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, the government's already, we know there's deep underground military bases all over the place. But Antarctica is one of those places that the average American could not trespass on and locate what they're doing. But just to touch on what you mentioned about the opening, there was like 6 to 8 British intelligence members that were down there, and they had set up some soldiers to kind of stay guard on a certain area. And I don't know these people. I'm just going to pass this information on. People can take it or leave it. But the story goes something like this. They were told not to cross a certain border, that they had to stay in a certain location. Well, they got into a plane and they exceeded the boundaries that were set for them. And that's where they found the second opening that before that, nobody had ever talked about a second opening. Before that, it was just a matter of the pole. There was an opening at the pole. But now these men, they flew over the second opening and they said that they saw entities and they saw other strange things taking place over there that they could not explain, things that absolutely defied human logic. And when they got back to where they were supposed to be, they were heavily reprimanded and sent home. Now, I don't know if they ever made it home. I don't know how it works over there. I don't know what type of secrecy, what they're willing to do to keep those secrets, but they were heavily reprimanded. That's the story that I got. And all they did was fly over a certain place they were not supposed to fly over, and they got in trouble.
Yeah. What do you think is because you mentioned the British intelligence, which, you go down that rabbit trail, it all kind of connects in the same web as well. You got the Freemasons, which, connects to the Zionist regime, which connects to the Jesuit order, which, trickles back to the Vatican. What's the biggest institution doing the covering up, in your opinion?
It's hard to say because it's so compartmentalized. I believe that Lucifer is the head of the Illuminati. I believe that the Rothschild family, getting into that area of research, you find out that the Rothschild family has for many years held the title of the Pendar of the Draco, or the penis of the dragon. And I know it sounds vulgar, but that's what they call the head of the Illuminati, is the penis of the dragon. Well, we know that the dragon is Satan. And so they've got it set up in a way where the head, or the Pendar, communicates directly with Lucifer. And this makes sense. It really does make sense when we start to think about it. And so he's getting his orders, he's getting his information directly from Lucifer. We know that Lucifer is not omnipresent. We know he can only be at one place at one time. He's not God. And so with this being the situation, he deals with one person, the Pendar. The Pendar, it all trickles down, and it's all compartmentalized, like what we call pyramid schemes. No pun intended. Right. And so in dealing like that, we understand that Lucifer is at the end of the day, he is the one in charge of all the conspiracy. Literally the conspiracy against God and God's people and God's word. It all comes down from Satan himself. So, whether you want to call it the Illuminati, whether you want to get into the idea of the Jesuits, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, it's all part of this big compartmentalized system. But again, I go back to what Paul said. And I know your question was more so speaking of fleshly terms, but Paul makes it very clear that we wrestle with principalities. And so when I look at these things, rather than deciding this man or that man, I say, well, it's Satan. Satan physically is doing these spiritual things. He's physically manifesting and dealing with certain people that are high up in this game, this cosmic chess match, and then they're taking his orders and they're running with it. So is it possible that Satan is set up inside the earth? Absolutely. Why wouldn't he be? We know in the book of Job, he says he's going back and forth to and fro, up and down in the earth. And furthermore, Gons, think about it like this. there is dark satanic activity. There is an operation of evil taking place in the earth, and it's so important to Satan that he goes back and forth down to it just to keep a check on it. It requires his attention, as we break down in the film. So something down there is that important that Satan is going back down there regularly to keep a check, to make sure that things are going as planned. So that tells.
It's almost like a.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, it's almost like the. It reminds me of the Lord of the Rings, when the orcs are down there hammering away, creating their weapons.
It is. It's much like that. I mean, really, movies give us a little glimpse into these things, and a lot of. Did you ever see the Supergirl movie?
Maybe. I don't know.
Well,
not ringing a bell off the top of my head.
It's a newer movie. I think it was Supergirl. And at the end of the movie, there's this little statement that gets made. She's trying to kill one of the gods of old. I think it's the god of war. I forget his name. But he makes a statement that, where do you think all these things come from?
Oh, you talking about Wonder Woman?
Wow, Wonder Woman. Thank you, man. I'm like losing my mind over here, dude.
Supergirl. I'm like,
Yeah, I don't watch Supergirl. Sorry about that.
Yeah, yes, I did see Wonder Woman, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I have notes from all these movies that I never actually made videos on. That movie was filled with all kinds of like little nuggets of, what's really going on or whatever. So yeah, I know exactly the scene you're talking about.
What does he say to her? He says, where do you think all these things come from? Where do you think all these inventions, and I'm paraphrasing here. He says,
it's like him saying he's whispering. He's got, he basically influences the people, and then the people carry it out.
Exactly.
That was kind of the idea. Yeah.
And when I heard that, I'm like, man, that's like the nugget of truth for this movie. I mean, granted, there's a lot of little tidbits in the movie, but
yeah,
that was it, because we have all this technology, we have all these crazy things that mankind is grappling, we're grappling at all these different technologies and these experiments, and where does it come from? These gods of old come around and they whisper in the ears of people, and they give people, these ideas and these technologies, in some cases, these blueprints, and that's what happened in Nazi Germany. The blueprints, the blueprints for their machine called the Die Glocke, that came from a channeling session. And one of the things we broke down in the film, I'll make this real quick, but Maria Orsic, one of the, she was what they called the Vril Maiden. She was one of the she was one of the heads of the Vril Maidens. And this was a group of clairvoyant, psychic mediums, occultists in the Nazi party. And you had the Vril Society, and then you basically had the Thule and the Vril, and it was two in the same, but one was the upper echelon. But in dealing with all this, they would go into these psychic trance states where they would automatic write. They would channel these entities. Now, they believed that they were off-world entities or extraterrestrial entities, aka the gods of old. But in this, there was a session that took place. Maria Orsic was there, and we don't know the name of the other girl for sure, but there was another woman medium there. But in the recordings, we just know Maria Orsic was the one who was doing it. She's channeling this material, and she has basically two sets of writings. And one of them is like this coded Templar's language. And then the other one is like ancient Sumerian. Interestingly, she had no education in either area of either one of these languages. Right. And it took them so many years to decode them. And once they were decoded, they actually were blueprints that had to be put together. It was like half of it was one language, half was the other, but they all had to be decoded in German and then brought together. And that was the blueprint for the Die Glocke. Some people believe it was a time machine. Regardless of what it was a high technology UFO craft, and they got that through channeling sessions, right. Automatic writing, channeling these entities. So goes right back to the whispering in the ear, being led by these spirits. That's pretty much that sums up pretty much all of mysticism. But as we enter into the end times, we're going to be seeing more of this technology coming forward, more breakthroughs, things that humans could not have done on their own. And many people, kind of going back to the Tesla idea, many people believe Tesla was getting his technology from helpers, or right. What, Werner von Braun called them. He pointed up and said them. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know about the Trump thing. I don't know how deep Trump goes into these things. It's interesting that he recently released the JFK documents. Could that be a cover-up to keep people from focusing on other? Look, we were all expecting some kind of disclosure to be coming out about alien life or UFOs. A lot of people, it's like it's imminent. We don't know when it's going to happen, but we believe that the full disclosure. Obviously, we've had soft disclosure, but people believe full disclosure is coming soon. So it's possible that the JFK document's being released, and according to Chad Riley, the co-producer of the film, he said that it's like more pages than one person can go through. So I don't know. Could the JFK stuff being released be a kind of trying to push people away from what's going on with this other stuff? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it could be a distraction, or it could be just because I think what's happening right now, especially with the internet and technology and everything else, there's this level of transparency that is being pushed out there. And so that's why I think a lot of the, the more shallow level corruption is being exposed right now with all the Satanism and all that. And what's interesting is they didn't have to dig too far to find the Satanism, which is interesting to me, but, and no surprise to any of us, but, and TV shows like you mentioned and stuff, going kind of back to the Hollow Earth idea and kind of tying it together. But, shows like, what's that? Kids, we're so bad with shows because we
Supergirl.
Not Supergirl. It's the movie not a movie. It's a show they just came out with. Stranger Things, and they have the Upside Down, which is this world that's underneath, and you can kind of get stuck in there, and there's the monster down there and all this stuff. So the concept is definitely being pushed more and more out there, and I feel like maybe. As the transparency continues and more things that were covered up in history become more, apparent, maybe this is part of the revealing as well, that they're allowed to sort of, and I think part of it also is to help, the mind control aspect. It's like some people are going to be like, yes, confirmed, and other people are just going to go right along with the MK Ultra programming, like buying into whatever, nonsense propaganda that they're being pushed into. But, I think, ultimately, when you're looking at the Hollow Earth thing, I guess my final question here comes from the whole Genesis 3:15 idea. The passage I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. Is this God talking to Satan? And, a lot of people have taken that a little too far, and some have said, oh, it's the serpent's seed. Others have said it's just colorful language. Given this idea that there are actual quasi-physical maybe, or part physical, I don't know, some sort of physical manifestation of evil in some kind of way or some kind of abomination, and perhaps them, convening or preparing for the day they can come back to the surface. Do you think this passage here, the enmity between the woman's seed and Satan's seed, are you starting to think that there's something more physical going on? I know that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, and obviously, we both agree on that. But what do you? Well,
the spiritual manifests into the physical realm, and so the war of the seeds, or the cosmic war going back to the seeds. We're told that war, that enmity is going to be taking place until Christ returns. Like, right. I don't see any other understanding of that in Scripture, and so it's all manifesting. It's all happening on a timeline, and these things have to be cooking up somewhere. And what a better place to do it than where Satan has his operations set up inside the earth. Now, he's not like the king of hell running around with a crown or anything like that, but there are things taking place down there that he's overseeing, like we've already mentioned. So, L.A. Marzulli makes a point that he believes the bottomless pit it's already there. We know it is, and we know that there's going to be a key that's going to be brought down by an angel, and that the bottomless pit is going to be opened during this tribulation period that we know is coming upon the earth. That's inside the earth. Somehow it's inside the earth, and when that opens up, these entities are going to be coming up out onto the surface. Now, think about all the entities that the religions of the world and the cultures of the world have been taught for thousands of years that reside inside the earth. This is another thing we break down in the film, is all these different stories that are passed down in these mystic religions about the entities and the gods of old, the spirits, the hybrids. They all line up with this idea that there's going to be a world savior rising up from inside the earth. I'm glad we're hitting this now. This is so important, and this is part of the film, is that they believe there's prophecies of this world ruler coming up, this supernatural hybrid entity of sorts, probably one of the ascended masters, depending on who you talk to. But they believe this man is going to rise up out of Shambhala with a mystical army, and he's going to do away with all the haters and all the evil people in this world. Now, we would be the evil people for not going along with what they believe. And so in doing this lines right up with what the Bible calls the Antichrist, the son of perdition, the man of sin, And so we get this idea that there's going to be this arrival from the inside of the earth. The gates of the earth are going to open, and this Antichrist is going to come up. They're going to see him as their God because he's coming out of this inner earth. Again, this is based on their prophecies.
Right.
He's going to rise up from inside the earth with his armies. And in doing this, we compare scripture to what their religions believe. And that's pretty much what we do throughout the film, is we cover a lot of history. We cover a lot of what what all the religions and the cultures believe, and we kind of tie it into what the scripture says. We give strong proof texting with scripture for why we believe what we believe, and then we tie it into prophecy. So it's all culminating in the last days, and the hollow earth is a major card in the deck for end times prophecy. So yes, I think these things are majorly important. I think that the hollow earth is a prophetic topic. We're getting so many great bits of feedback from people who have shown the movie in their churches. They've handed the DVD out to people, and people are watching this film that would never listen to our podcasts. They would never watch our YouTube channels. The stuff that we talk about on a regular basis, they can't handle that type of information. Right. But they're watching this DVD that somebody gave them, and they're having a paradigm shift and realizing that there are supernatural things happening inside the earth, and it's prophetic. And so I think that's where we need to be as Christians, is try to approach these things open-mindedly, realizing that we don't have it all figured out. But the truth is that there are things going on there that are going to continue to go on and then rise up to the surface in the last days, which I believe we're in the last days. I think that according to the book of Acts, that's when the end time started, when the prophecies of Joel began to be fulfilled. So we've been in the last days now for 2,000 years practically. I mean, we're going to be seeing things, and the Bible talks about, men's hearts will fail them for looking upon these things. We're entering into that time now, I believe, where mankind is not going to be able to handle this type of information when it hits them in the face. And I think that's why the enemy is working overtime, bringing out all these movies and these TV shows, pre-programming the masses so that when these things start to happen, people won't see them for what they are, but rather they're going to see them as good. Oh, great, superheroes are rising up. Oh, great, mutants. Oh, great, chimeras. Yeah. To the point where people want these things. They want to be with the superheroes, or they want to be transformed into a superhero themselves by altering or modifying their DNA. So, man, I'm giving you like these long, drawn-out, extended answers, man. I'm sorry.
But it makes sense, though. There's a new show coming out, Will Smith's Bright, and I think the whole thing is based on Will Smith as a cop or something, and he's got his sidekick, which is an orc. He's an orc, and he's like a good guy or whatever. And I thought that's when it really made me think, like, wait a minute, they're really trying to normalize something that's, abominable. Not just an orc being like a fictional character, but they're just trying to make something that is clearly detestable to the human sort of normalcy, and trying to make it normal, trying to make it just like, oh yeah, another entity that's cool, And it sucks because even like you mentioned the Yeti earlier, the Yeti sightings. I think about obviously Chewbacca and Star Wars, and everybody loves Chewbacca,
Oh yeah, we laugh about it.
But what are they really conditioning us for with that kind of thing? You know what I mean? Like, if a Chewbacca looking thing came out and was like, "Brr," everyone would be like, "Oh yay, Chewbacca," until he like tries to eat us or whatever, right? So it's weird. It's that scene from Independence Day where they're sitting on top of the building and they're like, "Oh, our gods are here, yeah," and then they get blasted.
Yeah, and people have a heart for these things. Like, if Chewbacca were to get shot, people would be like crying. Chewbacca got shot. Or here's one for you. There was a show that came out back in 97 or 98 called Roswell, and it was like a teeny bopper. It was basically like a paranormal version of Dawson's Creek. And I mean, that really happened. But no, in the show, like, they're conditioning you to, there's these aliens that come down from outer space, and they basically hatch out of their pods like so many years later, and they're in modern times in high school, and they're dealing with all the same things that normal kids deal with. And we find out that they're hybrids. They're half alien, half human, and they're falling in love with humans, and even having, intercourse with humans. And it's all set up kind of like the Twilight series, which I didn't see those, but the storyline that we get is that by the time you're done watching the Twilight series or reading the books, like, you want the vampire to marry this girl, and you want him to bite her and turn her into a vampire, right? Because you want their love to,
last forever.
Yeah, you want it to overcome all the obstacles. And that's what these shows are doing and these movies are doing, is they're trying to humanize and normalize the paranormal. I got on Netflix the other day and there's like this new show out. I didn't watch it, but it's like an animation for kids, like about monsters. Like there's like little preschool vampires and werewolves and witches. And I just saw the headline for it, at the top of the screen, and it said, werewolves, witches, monsters, vampires, blah, blah, blah. They're just like you. ... but they're monsters, and they're conditioning kids to think that witches, werewolves, vampires, and all these other abominations, they're conditioning kids to think that they're just like us. They have feelings just like us. We need to coexist with them. The only difference is that they're monsters and we're humans, but they're just like us. And this is the type of conditioning that we see, and they're hitting the younger generation, because they know that these things are going to stick with the kids. I could tell you today, I remember certain episodes of cartoons that I watched as a kid. I'll always remember DuckTales, Tailspin, Goof Troop, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. I remember specific episodes because they get into your head and you take it with you to the grave. And that's what they're doing with this paranormal stuff. The kids are getting, turned on to this paranormal programming at such a young age. But they got it for us, they got it for kids, they got it for teenagers, they've got it for every demographic that's out there. It's all conditioning.
Yeah, man, it's so crazy. It touches so many different areas of research, and it's impossible for a lowly YouTuber like myself to cover it all. Although you're going big time over there with the Skywatch, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Where can people find your film? Where can they support what you do?
Well, I do have a podcast called Fourth Watch Radio, and you can go to Fourth Watch Radio, all spelled out, fourthwatchradio.com, and you can follow the podcast there. We usually put out, I'm doing a show every other week right now as I'm going through the move, but I'm hopefully going to be getting back on one show a week. I've got other hosts on the network, so we're putting out content every week. You can go to the Justen Faull YouTube channel. But if you want to check out the Hollow Earth Chronicles film, and we're planning on making another one, the sequel to the first one, but it's Hollow Earth Chronicles Episode 1, The Dark Chambers, and you can go over to Fourth Watch Films. That's Fourth Watch Films, all spelled out. Hopefully you can put a link there, but it's fourthwatchfilms.com. If you go to that link, you're going to see that you can watch the movie instantly in high definition on Vimeo. You can order the DVD. We've got U.S. orders and international link on our page as well. But I'm a stickler for quality. I like HD. We shot this whole thing in 4K cinema, so I really like to watch it in full high definition. So if you want to see the high def version, definitely go over there and fourthwatchfilms.com. Click the link. You can watch it on Vimeo instantly.
Sounds good. And I'll leave all those links in the description section. So, all right, yeah, definitely check out the documentary. Go support the Fourth Watch over there. Thanks for coming on, Justin.
Hey, thank you, Gons. I really appreciate it.